Hello, everyone. Good to see the crowd. And what a pleasure to have Howard Dean in our meeting. My goodness. We're eager, Howard, to hear your thoughts. You've already had a number of us approach you and say, I want to hear what you think about, anyway, about this frightful moment in the history of our country, and also about how to vitalize the Democratic Party into a force of resistance to authoritarianism. There is a lot of disappointment among Democrats that our leaders are not showing up. So, and we'd also like to know how you could advise us as elder activists to get engaged in this fight, at least in the state environment. Right. I'm going to keep my introduction brief because you are so well known and beloved as a political figure in this state. Don't frown.
Well known, yes.
You know. Anyway, very briefly, you will all remember that Howard is a physician, that he became involved in politics at the same time as he was engaged in his practice. He started out in the Vermont House of Representatives, became lieutenant governor, and then, as you know, became one of the longest serving governor in the state of Vermont in the 90s, so 5 consecutive terms. His achievements are too lengthy to go into. We want to give the floor over, but they included expansion of health care for the very young and for pregnant women, and the legalization of same-sex marriage, which made Vermont the first state to take that step in the country. You will also remember that he entered the presidential race in 2004, and in the process he created an internet-based way to make donations, to fundraise, and also promoted local organizing, which changed the nature of our political process utterly, and it's remarkable that he initiated it. He also served as the chairman of the Democratic Committee, National Committee, where he pioneered strategies to make inroads in red states that weren't even being considered. In other words, a sort of 50-state strategy, different strategies for different states, which proved successful in winning elections. So, need I go on? I think I should stop there and hear from this man, but David, you may want to add. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yes.
This was planned.
Laura has left perhaps the most important achievement to me to mention, which was mentioned. Microphone. Oh, okay.
So we have to start over, David.
So, of course, many of you read 7 Days, and this was mentioned in the 7 Days 30th anniversary edition, which was that, and again, those are different ways of looking at achievements, but I think this is significant, and that's why Laura left it to me to mention. Back in 1998, for the Valentine's Day edition of 7 Days. It was the first time they had done a sex survey, and I think he knows what I'm talking about. And what they discovered was that by a large margin, both women and men found Howard Dean to be the most bangable public figure. I think that achievement. I sort of imagine a
In
wall.
public life, we ought to say in public life.
In public life. And this is across the country, of all public figures across the country. And I imagine in Howard Dean's home, he's got a wall of all of his achievements. And I think this is like in the center, the biggest, the most significant. 7 days.
Well, thank you very much. I just remembered I had an important day.
So, but we are, of course, a very serious organization, and we invited you here to address, we all have different questions, but really I think we do have three fundamental questions that we struggle with as Third Act, as an organization of elders seeking to leave a better world for our children, our grandchildren, and future generations. And it's really three fundamental questions. One, how do we save our democracy? Two, how do we save our climate? And three, who's the most bankable? And of all the people who could address, I think, all three questions, I think Howard Dean is the one. So thank you for appearing. And thank you for not leaving in the middle of my introduction.
Well, I'll answer the last question first. The least bangable is Donald Trump.
I like that. I like that.
And that's already cost him $85 million and going up. Let me start with, I don't want to give any hype to a rival publication, but there was a big piece by Kevin O'Connor in Vermont Digger over the weekend, which I knew he was doing something. I didn't expect that. But it was fun. And one of the things, I think the core message that I was talking about is really sort of answers one of the questions, which is what can we do? I'm going to get into the democracy question and all that in a bit. And I don't think our generation ought to be kicked to the curb, but I think it ought to be really clear that it's time for somebody else to run the place, and preferably somebody who's 30 years old or 40 years old. Zoran Mamdani is pretty much to my left, but I'm absolutely vigorously supporting him because I think it's the way he got the nomination in New York was to get a ton of young people to come out and vote for him. And we're losing ground among young people, especially young men, which we can get into why that is, and which I think would be useful. So I think what we ought to do as a generation is support young people getting into politics as much as we possibly can. They won't all be perfect, and we'll disagree with them from time to time. But that is the future, and it's hard to kick us boomers to the side because we've been a hugely dominant generation in ways that you could never imagine. One of the reasons I remain optimistic about the country, even though I agree we're in tough shape, is when I went to college, I had two black roommates my freshman year. They had never been to school with a white person before. I'd never been to school with a black person before. Women were not allowed in the college until my junior year. And there was not a single person who dared to say they were gay in the entire university. I knew not one. Now, there were obviously plenty of gay people, but not one single person did I know who was open about their sexuality. When you think how much we've changed in our lifetimes, it's extraordinary. And it's not a small change. It's the democratization of the world in many ways, because there are other places that have followed us. And interestingly, though, the places that have not followed us are the authoritarian countries who have actually used hate as a weapon, as the Republican Party does, to divide us. And it's been successful. If you look at Orban in Hungary, who was elected, a democratically elected fascist, or any of the other autocracies, and even some places that are not autocratic. Persecution in the old formula of othering people is still very successful. And we're going to fight again about that for the rest of our lives because I think we're a flawed species. And so a lot of the reason I believe in democracy so much is it's the way of trying to cancel out all our different flaws in a large sort of group by having a system where we can negate our differences and at least discuss our differences. I was asked when I came in about the Vermont legislature and whether it works. And we can all have an opinion about that. I'm happy to discuss that later on. But it works, I think, much better than most other places. And the reason it does is all the flaws come out. But the truth is it's 150 people, or 180 if you include the Senate, where everybody's proposal has to be vetted. So in this big education thing that we're going through, I've been through 3 of these. And they're all awful because somebody always has to lose and somebody gains. And they're all bitterly fought out. And then everybody hates everybody who had anything to do with it. I remember having a very tough election when we passed Act 60. And all the Stowe people and the Woodstock people and all that voted against me. The next time they all voted for me because Ruth Dwyer was running on a program that hated homosexuals, basically. It was Ruth's program. So, we have to go through this process. Democracy really is messy, but it is, as Winston Churchill said, the worst system except for every other. And I think we ought to keep that in mind. And now it's not our turn anymore. Our turn, it's got to be the 20-year-olds and the 30-year-olds. I do want to set a few facts from my introduction straight. I actually served for 5 3/4 terms, and that made me the longest serving governor in the state of Vermont, but not the longest serving governor in the history of Vermont. Thomas Chittenden served 9 one-year terms when Vermont was a republic. And then in 1791, we became a state, and then he served 8 more terms. So he served 17 one-year terms. So while I'm technically the longest serving governor in the history of the state of Vermont, I am not the longest serving governor in the history of Vermont. There's a few other little corrections I was going to make, but we'll skip those.
My source is Wikipedia.
Well, Wikipedia, I'm a fan of Wikipedia. I make small donations, but
correct them.
well, that's true. That's true. Well, at least you have the ability to do that. It's not so great in the New York Times or Fox News, which is a lost cause. So anyway, the first point is it's not my business to tell you what you should do and whether you should run, and do I think we should have age limits on the legislature? No, I don't. I actually don't even believe in term limits in Vermont. I believe in the 2-year term. And people complain about it because they don't like the advertising. But my attitude is, if you don't like the advertising, too bad. How'd you like to be in Russia where there isn't any advertising except for whatever the hell the Russian propaganda outfits are? I mean, this is all part of the price of our democracy. And 2-year terms, I think, is absolutely great because it forces every citizen to at least vote. People hate the ads and they hate the money and they hate well, if you want to live in a democracy, you've got to put something into it. And the minimum you can put into it is paying attention and voting. I actually believe that the Italian and the Australian system, where you get fined if you don't vote, is reasonable. It will never pass in this libertarian country of ours. But, if you don't vote and you sign out of politics, you get what we've got now, which is a bunch of incompetent boobs who are authoritarians. And so there's a price that we have to pay to live in a democracy, and freedom, as they say, is not free. And it's not just a military slogan, it's a slogan for all of us. We have to put up with stuff we don't want. Sometimes we have to live under laws we don't like. When we did the Civil Unions Bill, by the way, that's an interesting story because I was not the governor that got marriage through. I couldn't get it through. I was the governor, and Bill Lippert and Tom Little, who was one of the most remarkable Republicans I ever met. His father was the same way. He's passed on. He was a very incredibly decent human being. He was in the Senate when I was lieutenant governor. Tom Little and Bill Lippert came to me. Bill Lippert was the vice chair, one of the few, maybe the only openly gay legislator at the time. And they came to me because the bill was in the House. The Supreme Court had said you've got to do equal rights for everybody. And if you ban gay people from marriage, then there's 1,700 financial rights you can't get if you're gay. It's just outrageous, which was probably the argument that what swung me over. And so Little and Lippert came to me because the first stop was the House Judiciary Committee, and they said, we can't get this through. I don't know what we're going to do. Here's our solution. We're going to call it civil unions, and it'll be all the same privileges of marriage. And they did get that through the House, and then it got through the Senate. And it was probably the most courageous bill I ever saw, because people voted for it that knew they were going to lose their seats, and they did lose their seats as a result. The most courageous, there were a lot of courageous people. One of the most extraordinary things is everybody explained their vote. That's not something you do. Anybody may explain any vote they have, and once in a while somebody's going to vote against their constituency, but they feel they have to, or when they get up and explain their vote. Almost every senator, when it was passing, explained their vote. And Tim, the guy from Mark, he's not there anymore. He was from Orange County, and he was there for a long time. Anybody? Mark McDonald, who came from Orange County, which is a Republican county. It's conservative. The guy was an incredible worker. He was a Democrat. And he got up and has explained his vote this way. He said, you know, my phone's been ringing off the hook and all my constituents hate this bill, and I've told them I'm going to vote against it. But I was thinking as I was driving up to Montpelier this morning, I'm an 8th grade social studies teacher, and I was thinking how I was going to explain my vote to my 8th grade kids. So I vote yes. He lost his seat, although he was an incredible campaigner, and 2 years later he got his seat back. But you know, there are not a lot of people with courage in politics. And that brought out a lot of courage. And so it was an extraordinary, although I had another guy in the Senate, whose name I'm not going to mention, who came to me and said, look, can't you just ask for a study committee and we'll study this for a year and get us past the election? And I said, you know, that's not a problem at all. That's a great idea if you don't mind my suspending your civil rights for another year for the convenience of the elections. So the bill went out and it passed the Senate. So I'm proudest of that bill, not because of what it did for the people of the state, although that's very high ranking, but because I learned so much about myself. And it is true, as Kevin O'Connor wrote, that I had to wear a bulletproof vest for most of the summer. And the funniest story about that was, there were many funny stories, some weren't so funny. So the cops were very nervous, because I had a delegation of police, the governor gets state trooper protection, and somebody drives me around. So I go up to the Northeast Kingdom. This bill was not popular in the Northeast Kingdom, for those of you who remember this. And so I'm meeting with a bunch of trappers who were mad about something else. So that was fine. I mean, most of you know I did have an A rating from the National Rifle Association when I was governor. It came in very handy when I was going to the Northeast Kingdom, which is a whole other story. But anyway, so we're meeting in this tavern, which was really in Newport, and there's a back room. And then there's a ante room, and then there's the bar. And luckily, it was in the afternoon. So the police are they've tripled the size of my people who drive around with me, and they're all terrified. I'm just going, well, whatever. I know these guys, they're not so bad. But this was when the place, most of you were here. It was a really tough time. I mean, there was threats everywhere and all this. So I walk into this tavern, and there's this bunch of guys with, check jackets, big beards, and, pretty big bellies, and these are big guys. And I'm looking at them, and I knew every single one of them because it was all state police people undercover. And the room was in the back room where these nice guys who happened to like trapping animals were. It was, anyway, it was quite a time in Vermont, but I learned a lot. Now, the most important thing I did, I think people ask me this all the time, was we've had universal health care in this state for everybody under 18 for 30 years. And the reason we did is another good story. Why come to these meetings unless you're going to hear a story? So I was very close to the Clintons. And the reason was that Ralph Wright wanted me to support Bill Clinton, and I was supporting somebody else. But I stopped supporting somebody else because he had the same staff that a previous candidate in another race had, and I promised I would never work with him again. So I didn't know what I wanted to do, but the speaker, I needed the speaker's help. And for those of you who remember Ralph Wright, he either helped you or he didn't. But if he didn't, it was a major problem. So I agreed to do Hillary Clinton's, she was coming to Vermont. I agreed to endorse her. That afternoon, I don't know how many of you remember the draft letter. This was one of the very few mistakes. Bill Clinton, who was by far the best politician in my lifetime in terms of his skills, after he got out of the draft, long before he was governor of Arkansas, he was given a 1Y or something, and he wrote the head of the draft committee in Arkansas saying, "Thank you so much for saving me from going to Vietnam." Well, when a letter like that gets published and you're running for president of the United States, you've got a lot of explaining to do. And the explaining was going to be in Montpelier at the Tavern Inn, because that was the night that Hillary Clinton was coming to Vermont. And I'm calling up these people, and I said, what the hell I didn't know the Clintons. And I said, what the hell do I do? I mean, and the guy said to me, in for a dime, in for a dollar. Go down and tell them how great these people are, and you better vote for them. And I did, and Clinton never forgot it. So when I got to be governor, I wanted a waiver, a Medicaid waiver, to make sure. Dr. Madeline gets the credit for Dr. Dinosaur. I did not. Dr. Dinosaur was originally meant for pregnant women and kids under 5. And I got Clinton to expand it to everybody under 18, less than 300% of poverty. And if you're making less than 300% of poverty, I mean, if you're making more, you're almost certainly working for somebody who gives health insurance. So we basically had 100% of kids in Vermont insured since whenever it was, 91 or 2. So, but in order to get this, I by this time I was rising in the ranks of governors, so I was going to the White House a lot and have lots of stories about the Lincoln bedroom. Well, I'll have to tell you that one too. What the hell? What the hell? I'm old. I'm not running for anything. So I'll tell you that one. Then we'll get serious about the questions. So anyway, the job of a president's staff is to keep people away, like me, away from the president and being a pain in the butt. But I wanted this waiver, and I didn't ask him for much, and he remembered that night about the draft. He wasn't here, Hillary was. And so I used to go to these receptions in the White House, and we were all suited up, and then I'd stick it in the receiving line, Mr. President, I'd shake it with one hand, and I'd stick a note in his pocket with the other. And he'd read it, and the next day I'd get a call from his staff, Governor, I'm so sorry we haven't, I don't know what happened, but yes, we'll have that waiver right out for you. Anyway, a bunch of those, and we got the waiver. So the last story I'm going to tell you is about the Lincoln bedroom. I don't think I've told this one publicly. So the Lincoln bedroom, you may remember, because our age will remember, was this. There's a third or fourth floor of the White House. Once you're in the White House, there's no security because you can't possibly get in unless you sell your firstborn child and have everybody know everything about you. But once you're in, so you're in. So I'm spending the night in the White House in the Lincoln bedroom. The Lincoln bedroom had been exposed as this place where Clinton was coming in and giving his donors, and now they could they'd spend a night in the White House and all this kind of stuff. The Lincoln bedroom was perfectly nice, but the third floor of the White House, where nobody lives, is, shall we say, not exactly up to date. And that it's beautiful. It has these big, wide plank old pine floorboards and all this kind of stuff. And these 4-poster beds, but that's about it. And old rags on the rugs on the floor for nothing special. But I'm going to the Lincoln bedroom. So we get in the elevator, this teeny little place, and Hillary says, Clinton doesn't drink, and Hillary really doesn't either. But there were some other people at the dinner who were just incredibly sauced. So they were disposed of and ushered cleverly out by the Secret Service. And I went up to the Lincoln bedroom. We go up in this little elevator. I go in the room. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm exhausted. Clinton is in, he has all this energy. And so I stripped down to my underwear because I'm about to get in the bed. This is nothing fancy. This is a 4-poster bed. This is 200 years old and a bunch of wide floorboards and a few rugs and a freezing floor. And all of a sudden, people don't realize that this is nothing special. And there's plenty of people who spend their nights in those bedrooms up there. There's a Madison bedroom and a few others. It's just this long hall. It's like a dormitory with a couple of rooms here and a couple of rooms there. So I go to the Lincoln bedroom, which is the first one on the left. And there's a guy from Clinton's childhood who was invited to, but what doesn't go to Clinton was very loyal to his people he grew up with in Arkansas, and he really did grow up from nothing. And so there's this guy at the other end of the hall who hasn't been to any of the dinners, but he's up there because Clinton said, come on over. And so the door, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, the door opens as Clinton is walking, back down. He goes, hey, Bill, how are you, boy? And Bill Clinton, who's, again, the most skillful politician I ever met, goes, hey, Billy Bob, how are you? Remember that time we was fishing on the Arkansas River? And back off they go. And they might as well have been speaking French or something like that. I'm exhausted. I'm standing there in my underwear. I'm about to get into bed. I put my hand on the doorknob and I say, oh, you're going to go out and tell the President of the United States to shut up with your underwear on? I don't think so. So I'm having this battle with myself, and what the hell am I going to do about this? And finally, Billy Bob goes back to bed, and that was the end of the story. So all right, there's lots more, but we're not going there. So not running yourself doesn't mean you can't help. The most important is checks, which is fine, and doing fundraisers, which is fine. There's two kinds of fundraisers, the kind that raise $1 gazillion and the kind that raise $10 by 50 people, and then the 50 people all go tell their friends. So they're both important. a lot of stuff that came out of my campaign was postcard writing, and people still do that. And you can do that with people of other states. It is true that the central part of the party I'm not going to spend my time on the, shoring up the senators and all that kind of stuff. I'm going to spend my time working with local campaigns that are either in Vermont or in Ohio. I mean, we have a good shot at taking the Senate back because Sherrod Brown is, first of all, Clinton's numbers are awful. I mean, Trump's numbers are awful. Sherrod Brown is an experienced senator who really has good working class credentials. Bernie was right when he said if you abandon the working class, you shouldn't be surprised that the working class is going to abandon you. So it's not too late because Trump has treated them like crap, as you would expect. So life is tough if you're a working class person. It hasn't got any better since Trump has been in office. It's gotten worse. So there's a lot. We've got good candidates. We should take the Senate seat in Texas, because Cornyn is going to be beat by this right-wing crackpot, but he's an effective, mean-spirited crackpot who's the attorney general, and he's going to beat Cornyn in the primary, and we've got two good candidates. Two. One is a young guy named Tallarico, who I know not much about, and the other is Colin Allred, who didn't lose to Cornyn by all that much the last time. He was a professional football player, and he's very well-spoken and all this kind of stuff and can raise a lot of money. So we have a shot in Texas. I think John Ossoff is going to win. They can't figure out which right-wing crackpot they want to run against him. And there are other places that we can pick up. So I think we have a shot at the Senate, and I think if we don't take the House, there's something fundamentally wrong with us. The big problem is whether Trump steals the election or not, which he has every intention of trying to do. And there's going to be a lot of courts. Most of the judges are fair and reasonable. The Supreme Court, I think, has been in the bag for the Republicans for 20 years. And so that's going to be a big problem if we essentially don't have a functioning Supreme Court anymore. And so it'll be hard to stop them from, but remember, voting is a state responsibility. So the Supreme Court may have a lot of stuff they're going to say and do, but the fact is state courts matter more. And that's another thing that matters. If you're going to do work for campaigns, state Supreme Courts. I don't think justices should be elected. I think it's an awful system, but there are places where they are. North Carolina is one of them. Wisconsin is another one. And there's going to be a bunch of other statewide, Pennsylvania is another one. Those are races that matter. And instead of spending, if you're going to send a check for $100, I'm not sure I'd send it to some Senate candidate who has a budget of $25 million. I think I might send it to somebody running for the Supreme Court in one of these very close states. So that's one thing. Money, I do think that letters are effective. There's a great organization called something like Sister something. It's out in California. Tons of these organizations came out of my campaign. My campaign, Kevin O'Connor wrote that I started all this. I'm to blame for all the 150 emails you get every day asking for money. It's true, but I had nothing to do with it. It was young people. I mean, this was a campaign I knew nothing about the internet. I still know nothing about the internet. But 20-year-olds decided they wanted me to be their candidate, and the stuff they did was unbelievable. I remember once, when you're running for president, you come home every 2 weeks and you spend a half a day with thanking everybody in the office who's killing themselves for you, and then a half a day with your family so they remember who you are when it's over. And so I go to the office just when I'm starting to come up, and this kid comes up to me and says, "Governor, we'd like you to have a ham sandwich for lunch and sit in front of this computer." And I went, "What?" This is a 20-year-old telling me what to do. Okay, I'll do it. So I sit and have the ham sandwich. In those days, there was no camera in the computer. They put a Logitech camera on top of it, and they dialed me in to some whatever. It wasn't called this then, but it would be Zoom. And it turns out that Dick Cheney is giving a fundraiser at $25,000 a couple in South Carolina for lunch. And they are raising money from 300,000 kids, $5 a piece. And we raised $625,000 to his $525,000 over a ham sandwich for lunch. Now, you think I could have thought of that? I don't get any credit for my campaign at all, except for the Scream speech, of course, which we can talk about later. So, I mean, this campaign was invented by 20-year-olds. It was extraordinary. And it's now the way you campaign. Now, there's lots of things in the technology world that we have to learn about how to do influencing and all that kind of stuff. And that's going to be something that we have to focus on better and do a better job. But there are also all these organizations. Run for something is incredibly important. If you're so inclined and you've got some extra money and you don't want to just spend it on give it to Run for Something. They recruit young people, particularly young people who are in minority groups, whether it's racial minorities or LGBTQ or whatever it is, to run for office. And about half of them win. So people like the Chicago Water Commissioner all of a sudden turn out to be this young gay guy. And the reason that matters is not because we have to have young gay people running the Chicago Water Authority. It's because it makes the rest of the country look like we all look like each other. And despite whatever I'm about to say about the governance structure, this is the most extraordinary country on the face of the earth. Not just because we have democracy and all these other things, but because this is the only country, up until Trump and his right-wing crackpots took over, where we value diversity. And where we are diverse, and whether we like it or not, we have to get along with all kinds of people who don't look anything like us and haven't had our life experience. But now we're all sharing that life experience. That was the reason I started off by talking about my black roommates who'd never been to school. Today, the world is different for our kids and our grandchildren. And so this is still a fantastic country at its roots and at its core. Yes, we have terrible problems. Yes, there's a lot of hate and all this stuff. There's a small group of people who don't believe in democracy, funded by billionaires, right-wing billionaires, and that's who is now running the Congress. There's not an ounce of courage in a single, believe it or not, the only guy I respect on the Republican Party in the House is Thomas Massey. And his views on everything are really awful, but at least he's willing to tell Trump that he can stick it. And there's not another Republican who has the you-know-whats to do that and stand up for the country instead of standing up for his own backside. It's one of the reasons I believe in term limits in Washington, which is a really hard position to take when you've had a senator that's done what Pat Leahy did for us because he was there for a while. I used to say when I was governor, Pat Leahy is the fourth biggest industry in the state of Vermont. I mean, the reason all this stuff is named after him is because in a small state, this makes a big difference. But the truth is, we'd be better off if these damn senators would have to get the hell out and stop worrying about what the president thought and start worrying about what their constituents were. And the same with Congress. I think term limits works great. This democracy was never intended to have professional politicians. It was intended to have people who went back to their farms and whatever it was after they'd served. And the more people we share that serve, the more people are going to understand. When I got to the legislature, whenever it was in 1492, I was astonished because you ask these questions, well, how come it doesn't work this way? How come it doesn't work that way? And I was on the education committee, which is not, I was a freshman. And all of a sudden you realize that it doesn't work this way because the teachers union wants to do that, and the principals want to do that, and the taxpayers want to do this, and it's not so easy. Well, the more people that had a chance to understand why it's not so easy, the better the system works. And the more we have to listen to each other about why having different points of view is important and why it's important that we respect other people's points of view, even if we don't agree. There's some issues there's bright line issues for all of us. For me, it's civil rights. But everybody has a bright line. For some people, it's taxes or money or whatever. So there's some things that's very hard to get compromises on, but if you never see each other and you never spend any time with each other, it's not going to work. And that's why I believe in term limits. Here I don't care about term limits, but why? Because a 2-year term, you're exhausted and the voters have a right to get rid of you. So that's great. And there are very few people who have lasted a long, long, long time. There's a few. There's probably 5 or 6 people down there who've been there for a long, long time. But most of them, there for 10 years and then they're out. And, I'm not in favor of health insurance for legislators. Why? Because I want them to have another job. There's a right to serve law. You cannot fire somebody for serving in the legislature. The teachers, for example, you can't fire a teacher who gets elected to the legislature who can't teach. They can teach Monday and then you have to get a sub for the other. And you say, well, that doesn't make the school system work very well. My problem is not the school system. My problem is the political system and the governance system. And so I want to make it hard. I don't want to make it impossible for people to serve, but I want to make it hard enough So there's going to be a rotation. And every 2 years, people get tired. I think that's just fine with me. Let somebody else come along and let them get into it. There's not one of us that's so indispensable that we can't, we need to be allowed to serve for life. And it is controversial. And you do lose good people this way. There are some really great people. I mean, Pat Leahy's an example. I would have been terrified if I had my way and got term limits when Pat Leahy was in, because he did so much for the state. But in the long run, in a system, that system's going to work better. I also believe, as I said before, in mandatory voting. Americans hate it. They're libertarian. But I think if you're going to live in a society and benefit from the whole discussion in the political system, you have at least the obligation to contribute something. And if you don't want to contribute money, at least contribute your vote. And if you think non-voting is an act, fine. Vote for the fifth party that nobody ever heard of. I don't care. But civic obligation matters. And I don't think we do enough about civic obligation, having people understand what the civic obligation is. Let's talk for a minute about where we are in the country. I think, as I said before, I think Bernie was right. If you don't... The most destructive of all the court decisions so far, I'm sure they're going to outdo themselves shortly, was Citizens United. And by the way, just so you know, John Roberts, Brett Kavanaugh, and Justice Coney Barrett all had the distinction of working in the 2000 election campaign for President Bush when the Supreme Court overthrew the votes of the majority. Now, the truth is, Bush probably would have won that race anyway. But a partisan Supreme Court, by a single vote, Republicans against Democrats, chose the President of the United States. Part of it, I think, was due to Gore. It was because Gore needed to go to Congress and say no. I don't think that would have been a winning strategy, and that may be why he didn't do it. But the truth is, the system for selecting a president, which has been used once during Reconstruction, where you had two horrible people running against each other, it's been used once. The system is, if it's a tie vote or it's not a clear vote and nobody has a majority, it goes to Congress, and each congressional state delegation gets a single vote. And the single vote is determined by the allocation inside the state. So I'm going to make these numbers up, but let's just say everybody obviously has 2 senators. Let's say Texas has 35 members of the House, and 27 of them vote for the Republican, then that's a 1 Republican vote. If Vermont has 1 member of the House and 2 senators, and 2 out of 3 of them vote for the Democrat, that's 1 Democratic vote. And if you looked at that system, at the Bush v. Gore system, Bush would have probably won, because the majority of people, if you look through that formula, everybody gets a single vote. And there were more states who had a majority delegation who were for Republicans. So it didn't change the outcome. What it did was establish the Supreme Court as willing to effect an unconstitutional approach to elections, and they have never recovered. And they've gotten worse and worse and worse. And now, because of Leonard Leo and the corruption of the Republicans and Leader McConnell, they have a group of not just Republican conservatives, they have hard right people who are essentially authoritarian. If you look at the structure, at the bill that gives the President of the United States immunity against all kinds of different things and expands his ability to do whatever he wants, that was a court decision made by a group of people who don't respect democracy. And that happens to be the majority of the Supreme Court of the United States. So we are in deep trouble. The biggest problem that we have is we're going to win the midterms because the public's, I don't know if you've seen the polling numbers for Trump, but they're pretty awful in every respect. The problem is, will they let us have fair elections? And they're working very hard on not doing this. And so that's going to be the big fight. I prefer that we focus on local elections because I think it's much more effective. The Senate and the House can raise tons and tons of money through the senatorial committee and the congressional committee. But smaller races are going to have trouble, and they're going to be, and go out. My mother, when she was 82 years old, went and canvassed for Obama in Canton, Ohio, with her 82-year-old friends. Did it mean that we won Ohio? No, but it might have helped the congressperson who was out there who who happens to be a conservative Democrat. Which brings me to my next question, next statement. I think we have to be a little more tolerant about who says they're a Democrat and who's they're not. I was furious with Schumer when he allowed the Republicans to get away with all this stuff they got away with and not shut down the Senate or the budget. Would I vote against Schumer in a primary? In a primary, I might, but I'm certainly not going to do it under any circumstances. So this idea, this is one of the knocks I have on the hard left, not just the left, because I'm sort of on the left now, I guess. But there's a certain sort of aspect of the progressives that can't take yes for an answer, and that's a big problem. I mean, we're all going to have to give something. And we're never going to get everything we want. But look at the problem we made for the progress we made in healthcare. At least we got everybody under 18 insured, and then gradually we got some other people on. And by the way, I said before, Madeline started Dr. Dinosaur. I did not start it. I just expanded it to cover everybody under 18, less than 300% of poverty. And I think Madeline does not get nearly enough credit, partly because she's a woman, for the things she did. I think a lot of people misunderstand. She had a cabinet that was very Kennedy-esque. There were a lot of very smart, intellectual people who really understood what the big goal was, and she had trouble getting there for a variety of reasons, not the least of which she was the first woman governor. But I do think she deserves more credit than she gets. But anyway, so we expanded a whole lot of that stuff. I think I'm going to stop there. I could go on forever, which I don't want to do because that's what our generation does. I will say one last thing about this. Probably won't be the last thing. But I think a lot of this problem has to do with young men and men in general who are deeply resentful of the power of women have acquired over the past. And, we're not there yet in terms of equality for women. But I can remember what it was like my parents' age, my father's age. His idea was he was the man and he was running everything. And the problem is, women have done much better than men. They're more serious. They work harder. I never had a chief of staff that wasn't a woman in all my career in politics. I didn't purposely pick a woman. That's just the way it was. And they were unbelievable. And I think, a lot of men have been coasting on their privilege for the last 400 million years. And all of a sudden, ain't there so much anymore. You better have something to show for it. And what I said in a talk, which got censored, is, if you're a rural person living in rural Midwest, and you're a male, and your job has been shipped to Mexico or someplace, and you don't have those good manufacturing jobs anymore, and you lose your job when you're 50 years old, you're not getting another one, except maybe as a greeter at Walmart, because they don't need your skills anymore. And so a lot of the deep resentment and the reason that Trump could cater to people's hate is people in places like that, their kids are leaving. They don't want to be in a place where everybody hates gay people, even if they don't happen to be gay. People are getting married across color lines and whatever, and nobody cares, but they care. And they can't find work because they don't know how the internet works, so they don't have an education, and their jobs have been shipped out someplace. So there's a tremendous amount of resentment, all of which Trump is incredibly skillful. Trump is very Hitlerian. They've got the same technique. It's those people's fault over there. It's those people. Elect me and I'll get rid of those people. That's what dictators do. I say he's not a dictator yet, but he wants to be one. And if we don't take over the House, he will be, because the court is not going to help us. I know everybody was hoping that the court would help. It's pretty clear they're not going to. So this is not going to hopefully be up to the judicial system. There are plenty of jurists at the appeal level and at the local level that are going to be helpful and fair. But the Supreme Court is not one of them. The majority of the Supreme Court is clearly not one of them. Amy Coney Barrett I'm on Blue Sky, because of course it wouldn't be on Twitter. No self-respecting person would be on Twitter anymore. And so I'm on Blue Sky this morning, and Amy Coney Barrett has been accused of something. She's mad. She says, I am nobody's justice, because she's being accused by the right for violating their, and I wrote just, my comment was, I'll say. So, on that note, comments, questions, and rude remarks as necessary. Yes?
So the issue with the Democratic Party and how you talk to people about, especially young people who don't view the Democratic Party as an instrument of change and disillusioned by it.
It's actually an easy solution. Change it.
Well, I know, yeah.
You can't convince somebody that you're changing something if you're not. So, elect Mamdani in New York, that'll be a change. I mean, that's kind of stuff. Look, he's probably to my left financially. The only reason I'm very comfortable with him is there's no chance he's going to get the money to do all the things he wants to do. Although some of them are pretty good ideas that are long overdue, such as free buses. Because a quarter of the people who get on the buses don't pay anyway. So, no, they don't. I mean, so, but you know, that's their candidate. Let's not poo-poo him and say, well, in my day, we're doing it this way. No, just work your ass off for the guy.
Right.
And there's tons of people like that. There's tons of young people that, you know, just because they haven't lived as long as we have and don't have the life experience doesn't mean they're going to make the same mistakes we made when we were 30. And we made plenty of them. So I'd say, you know, that's the first thing you can do is don't talk about what we have to do. Help them do it. And the other problem is, of course, the IT gap. When Kevin was doing this story, I said, you know, I still bank over the counter in the bank, and they keep wanting me to have all these gizmos on my computer. I'm not going to do it because I'm afraid of security, and I don't buy Amazon stuff because I want to leave the money in Vermont. I mean, I couldn't buy Amazon stuff if I wanted to because I wouldn't know how to get them on the, you know, and I used to think this was terrible and I used to be mad at myself. Now I'm just thrilled. You know, damn it, I'm not going to give in to their stuff. They'll have to give in. If they want my money, they're going to have to do it my way. And if they don't want to do it my way, I'll find somebody else. So, but you know, we should support young people, and they will have different, and they have a whole different, it's not so we're older and we have more experience, we do. And we've lived through some very bumpy times. I mean, just when you think of what we've lived through and having a government, two separate governments lie their faces off about what we were doing in Vietnam and what we were doing in Iraq, you know, that's a hard thing to go through. But they have their own battles, and we don't really know what they are because the life has changed so much that we can't possibly imagine. I mean, I can't possibly imagine as a 13-year-old coming home and finding out all her friends have naked pictures of her on the... It happens, and it happens more than not. And so we have to respect their experience. We have to support them as human beings, and we have to understand that this is their world. And we can make it better, but we're not going to run it, and we might as well get used to that.
What can we do to prevent or override Trump from messing with the 26 elections?
I think appeal in court, tie them up the best we can, make a big stink about it, and have good candidates running. Because look, this is why Trump didn't win his re-election bid. Biden was not a terribly strong candidate. But I think what happened was that you had, you know, the pandemic, and Trump was an incredibly exhausting person to be around. The economy was in trouble, and people picked Biden. I actually think that had something to do with why I thought Bernie was going to win. I did. I thought he was going to. We were headed into California, and I thought Bernie was going to win. And I think the public thought, wait a minute, Bernie's exhausting too. Well, he is. I mean, he's got, I admire him greatly, but you know, he wants this change and he wants that change. And I think the American people just went, oh my God, can't we have some little guy that's just not talking? Just, we got Trump over here, we got Bernie over here. Just give me somebody I don't have to think about, right? And actually, Biden was a pretty decent candidate. The truth is, I mean, he was a terrible candidate, but the truth is, he did a whole lot, interestingly, for the red states. There are tons of manufacturing jobs in the red states, including the Korean factory that Trump just shut down. That was put there by Biden. And I can't imagine what the reasonable, thoughtful Republican, I'm not a fan of this guy, governor of Georgia, Kemp, who's pro-business, but not a crazy guy. I can't imagine what he's thinking. They're going to shut these 300 jobs down and this incredibly great company that was Korean. And think of all the Georgian jobs that they lost doing this. People are sick of that stuff. The truth is, most of Trump's army is exaggerated. There are some people who, believe everything Bobby Kennedy said. Not many. And when they find out that they can't pay their bills and that Trump shut down the Hyundai factory, which their father was helping to construct, and that there weren't going to be 1,000 jobs making cars in Georgia, rural Georgia, where they really need the help. Trump is in charge now, and they're going to pay for that. So anyway, I think the way to save the election is, one, we have to have a lot of lawyers, and we have to keep on board with all the lawyers. Not so much the ones that sent you the money ask you to send the money on the internet. I know some of them. I wouldn't do it. I would support local efforts as much as you can. We're not going to have a big problem in Vermont, but if you know anybody in Virginia is going to be really important. I think we're going to win the governorship back there. I'm hopeful to get rid of Susan Collins in Maine, either with this lobster guy. Why not? And I think there's enough people in Maine that could say, what the hell do we have to lose? Just like they did in Burlington in whenever the hell it was, when I was young. 81.
Okay.
We don't want any. That was a spam call. Yes.
So there's probably going to be a big budget fight, or I hope there will be. What is or what should be a Democratic plan that says we have to have these things in the next budget?
Right. There's going to be a compromise. I think there's a number of things that are very important. If they're not in the budget, I think we should vote against it.
What would they be?
Well, since Trump has decimated everything, first of all, getting rid of all the Medicaid cuts, the most vulnerable people. Secondly, restoring all the food aid cuts. This is for the most vulnerable people. And then there's a whole, I could go on forever, but those are the two really, really big ones.
Public broadcasting, we really need that.
We do. Yes, that's one of them. I personally think we're going to be fine in Vermont. God knows the public broadcasting people are going to be furious with me for saying this, but Vermonters are going to support NPR because it's incredibly valuable here. But anyway, everybody's going to have a list. But for me, the biggest list is for people who can't fend for themselves, who Trump's totally abandoned. Anyway, so I'm going to go all the way around the room. If I don't get anybody, I'll come back. I didn't get anybody. Okay. Maz.
I love everything you're saying about youth. I feel that so strongly about the Democratic Party. And I'm kind of intrigued how it came to be such a gerontocracy.
Oh, I'll tell you exactly.
But can I ask you my question?
Sure.
You want to tell me and then I'll ask you.
Ask.
Okay, here's my question. I want to change the Democratic Party. I want it to be younger. I look around the European and Canada, people in their 40s and 50s. But the Democratic Party has stopped listening to its voters. And it's become incredibly unresponsive. Even given what you said about the Big Ten, Schumer to me is whatever,
right.
But over and over when you poll Democratic voters, they're so clear about stuff they want, and the party doesn't, those policies the party says they're ready. Can I give you what for me is one of the most painful examples, is Gaza. 67% of Democrats said American tax money should not be supporting a genocide. 7% agreed, but called it mass murder. That's 75% of voters that are saying no to that. And the party could have so much motion and they won't do it. Is the answer just like boringly, depressingly obvious? They're doing what their donors want them to do?
There's certainly a lot of that. That's the core problem. That's the core problem of the Democratic.
Can I just ask one more thing? For a group like this, obviously the old ways of communicating with the National Party, they're not responsive to us anymore.
Right.
We want these things and they don't respond at all. Do you have any ideas for like what can we do to get them to listen to their voters? Because people are just like, they're out.
Okay, so I'm going to leave Israel and Gaza aside for a moment, but I will
That was
say,
one example of a.
well, no, it's an important example because it raises a ton of emotion. But the fact is, people don't care about foreign policy. What they care about is I mean, people are horrified by what's going on, for sure. And Netanyahu is basically Trump with brains. But they're not going to vote on that. That has to be part of the package.
Young people might, ours.
They feel strongly about it, but I got to believe that Mamdani did not get elected because he had a position on Israel that young people liked. I got to believe that he got elected because all those young people went out and worked their you-know-whats off and knocked on a ton of doors, and because he talked to the voters, which were not the young people knocking on doors, about kitchen table issues. You can't afford the bus. You can't afford, we need universal health care.
Yeah.
That's what moves people. And, I'm horrified by what's going on in Gaza as well, as you might expect. But that is not going to change. What Gaza tells me about is the quality of the candidate who's doing what they're doing. So it might stop me from giving money to candidate X. But it's not going to.
Maybe that's the wrong example.
Well, no, it's a good example because everybody has some version of Gaza that they.
What I like to make was on issue after issue.
Right.
Democrat voters are super clear about a lot of things, and the party does not respond at all.
Well, I'm not going to ask you to support those people. I'm going to ask you to find a candidate that you like. I don't care where they are in the country and support them. This is a small group of people, right? It's not our job to get everybody in Congress. We can't get everybody elected. We should pick a candidate that we care about and make sure they get elected. That has preferably somebody that has some kind of chance. But there are more people that have a chance than you expect, and Mamdani's example is a perfect one. Now, he has an enormous amount of political skills, which I think people don't look at when they're thinking that, for us, we can look at his positions.
He's a star.
But the thing is his interpersonal reactions and his team, which understands how to communicate with people in ways that I never would have figured out because none of those things existed. I mean, I read all these articles about influencers and I'm going to go, you got to be kidding. But if you're 25 years old and you don't bother to watch all those stale television programs selling, deodorant or whatever it is, or mostly medications, I can't imagine what the average age of the news is based on the drug ads that I see every night. I'm just going, oh my God, isn't there anybody who's 20 that watches the news? The answer is no. They all watch some influencer, which is one of the major problems we have in the country. That is more a unification problem than it is a political problem. But unless we get better at that, and we are going to get better at that because the young people are not going to like Trump. There are some who will because they're so angry because the men and boys are, and you can see this in the polls, don't have the advantages that men had 50 years ago. But I think the best way to change this is for each of you to pick somebody. You pick the same person and make sure they get reelected. And it probably isn't going to be somebody from Vermont because unless somebody runs for governor, Democrat that I'm going to support.
We can all move to Maine.
And vote against Susan, right?
Work against her.
Right, but you could. If somebody comes out of that primary that looks pretty good, then I don't see why everybody. And there's going to be in New Hampshire. Some of these races are going to be very close. The Senate race and the House race is going to be very close there. So I mean, those are the kinds of things that you can do, and they do make a difference. And you can write a small check, because I know probably nobody here is going to write a gazillion-dollar check, but you can also go knock on doors. I had tons of people from all over the country knocking on doors for me in New Hampshire. And we did all right. We came in second. It wasn't too bad. Although second doesn't really count in presidential race. Anyway, I think what we just have to do is, this is a hard thing to tell volunteers because you want them to be really activated. I think we have to channel our outrage and discipline it. Because if you're just mad all the time and you just write somebody a check and this, no. When we trained people to go to the doors, we never trained people to say, isn't John Kerry an asshole, and all this stuff. No, because that's totally ineffective. The first thing you go to somebody's door is you ask them about themselves. And you go often. So door knocking is really effective, and there's not too many people in this room who couldn't do some of that, but you got to be trained to do it. You can't just, just go out there and knock on doors and say, here. And the first thing you do is you ask them about themselves. You don't say, I'm here for so-and-so, and I want you to vote for so-and-so. You say, I'm here, I'm working one of the campaigns, but I'm really interested in what you think what's the biggest issue for you? I know people are, all of a sudden, gee, the nicest person came by. And they don't know from a hole in the wall who's running for Congress, but a nice person came by and said, did you vote? Despite our polarization, we're not so polarized that, neighbors generally, there's some polarization even in neighborhoods, but not as much as the papers make it out to be. Yes?
The previous questioner, I felt like you were asking about the party, the Democratic Party, and you were focusing on individual candidates.
Right. I think you have to focus on it. Look, the party is a mess. The party is a mess because of big money. And the party is a mess because, as I always like to say, Washington is basically middle school on steroids. They work hard, they're smart, and it's all about them all the time. So there's no real, until they're up for election, there's no real connection between what goes on in Washington. There's even less on the Republican side. All they care is what happens at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue out of abject fear for themselves. Most of the people in the Republican Party that talk the way they talk couldn't get elected if they went back to their district and talked like that, which is why they're all getting shouted down. Most Americans don't have a deep fear and hatred of their fellow citizens. There are some who do, and you'd think they all do based on what Trump says. But look at Trump's numbers in the last few weeks. What matters is this guy, first of all, is this guy somebody you'd like to have a beer with? I think it'd be around the 3% mark for that. And secondly, the kitchen table is catching up with those guys. They're basically pillaging the United States of America and taking it from people who can't afford to give it up. And there's only a certain amount of anger that is going to motivate you to vote if your kids aren't able to finish school because you can't afford the books. Or if you're having trouble feeding your kids. You can be really, really conservative. But that's what's going to kill Trump, is all those, but not all those. Some of the people who he got to vote for him, out of annoyance and fear and anger and all these other things we've been talking about. They're just going to say, I just can't keep going on like this. So I'll try something else. Yeah. And that's why it matters who we pick. That's why we don't want a strong ideological screen on who we pick. I'm interested in this guy Bashir from Kentucky. I don't know a lot about him, but what I do know, Kentucky's a plus 35 red state. This guy's a Democrat. He's been there for two terms. What I do know is that he tried to pass a bunch of gay rights and stuff and got stuffed by the legislature. He vetoed it. They overrode his legislature. But he also gets reelected with huge numbers. Now, his father was also the governor and was a Democrat, was a popular governor. But that means he's got an ability to talk to people who we're going to have to talk to. I've got my liberal ideas, and so does everybody else here. But I'm not going to get all those done, especially in 1 year or 3 years. But it's really important, at least, to have somebody who wants to listen to me. They're also scared in the Republican Party. Even the Democratic Party is scared. So I would say the Washington politicians are basically, we need them because they're going to control the budget and stuff like that. But I'm not interested. I'm interested in local races. I'm interested in the legislature. I'm interested in city council. I'm interested in the school boards, which is the most thankless job in the country because everybody went to school, so they're all experts on schools. That's what I'm interested in, is local stuff. And that's where I think you can be helpful and make the biggest difference, yes.
Talking about local stuff, how do we get the governor to read a letter that we've written to him? What do we say that's gonna capture his imagination?
Well, Sean, you might want to give an example of the one that has just been sent by Third Act.
Yeah, well, there's a letter that's been sent by Third Act, that, you know, we're asking, maybe you should talk about your letter. Oh, you're back here, sorry, I get mixed up. Talk about your letter.
I think that what's happening with, whether it's Indivisible or Third Act groups in Vermont, we're shocked at with ICE and what's happening, grabbing people and going through the windshields and all. And we were trying to figure out how that happens. And basically, from the research that I and others have done, it's the governor signs a contract with ICE and the federal government to be able to put people in their prisons in Vermont. And they actually get paid for that. So I couldn't find out the answer, so I wrote with help from Third Act members asking him if he signed the contract. And the question is, do we have a king in Vermont that makes decisions that nobody else has anything to say on? And how do we make a change on that? And how do we get a discussion happening?
You have Mike Pichek run for governor. And tell him he's got to get off his butt and run now. Don't shilly-shally and wait for Phil to step down.
What if Charity runs also?
She won't. I mean, she'd be great, but this is my business, right? I have lunch with all these people all the time. So I have an inside track. She's not, she may someday, but she's not now. I mean, she loves being Attorney General. She wants to continue to be Attorney General. She'd be a fantastic candidate and a great governor, but she's not in the mix now because she doesn't want to be.
So my take on this, the way it was written was very polite,
right,
but forceful. And if there isn't an answer, then I go to public. His public conferences, where if he goes to do a talk in the Northeast Kingdom, wherever he goes, and I have a sign that says, Governor Scott, stand up to Trump and ICE. And he sees me wherever he is. And
Car race.
Who's your state legislator?
I'm here in Burlington, the Chittenden County.
Okay. Well, that would be one place to start the track. I'd have to think a little bit about whether I agree with you or not, though I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
And I don't have any idea obviously I've never discussed this with Phil. If they end up in jail in Chittenden County, we can still get them. And we can still get them out of jail.
I think there's consensus in Vermont to keep them in Vermont prison.
Right.
But they're grabbing them and bringing them to everywhere else.
Right, no, I agree, but
I don't want them in Vermont.
Okay, well, I mean, it seems to me that one of the few great stories is the guy where the judge wouldn't let him be shipped out of state, so he stayed in our jail, and then he got out.
Right.
So, in a perverse way, the closer they are to a reasonable, thoughtful group of people, which is Vermont, the better chance we have of a judge of saying to the federal government until it goes and gets overturned by the court, Trump court.
The governor could say.
So, but anyway, your basic problem is a constituency problem that you're not being answered. And I think the best thing to do is to speak to whoever your state legislator is and say, look, can you help me with this? Because they're going to have more access to the governor than you are.
Thanks.
What we would like from the governor is to explain what the contract entails. And also, a discussion with him about mass people in this state, et cetera, the tactics that ICE is using here. We would like a discussion with him about that.
Right.
And many of us have tried to reach him, and he doesn't respond, which is where we're at.
Right, well, I mean,
Yeah.
his staff.
So we're gonna start with our senators and.
Well, I would start to see if they're willing to do that. I mean, Phil's staff is extremely protective of him, which I always thought the best thing to do was go out and hear what people had to say and let them yell at you. But I think if you're having trouble, I'd go to one of your state senators, because there are only 30 of them, and those, if there's 150, unless they're the head of some, critical committee, if you have somebody that's the head of the Appropriations Committee, they may be able to make a case that you need to be heard. If it's just I know nothing about the interpersonal workings of the governor's office, but I would try to get one of your representatives, preferably a state senator, because there's only 30 of them, or a person who's a senior person, to intervene for you and say, look, would you meet with these folks who are really concerned about what you're doing?
I went to your daughter's soccer game a long time ago, when I had problems with my getting access to my fuel to my greenhouses. And then I went to the state senate it hit the right time when they were going on the budget, and the state senate stepped up for me, and the neighbors all around my area were very much against large trucks coming to my greenhouses. And then you stuck up for me. And there were 3 lawyers in the neighborhood, and one of my friends was the client to one of them. And after the whole situation happened and everything worked out, he went to him and said, I tried to get a really good lawyer, but a tomato farmer just beat you on. And he's dropped the lawyer. But it was to do, just as you said, going to speak to people. And that's what I'm going to do with Scott. If we're not getting the response, I'm going to just go, and he's going to see me, and I'm going to talk with him.
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know if his daughter plays soccer or not, but.
Might be able to get a journalist to ask that question in the press conference.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
At the press
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
I mean, if you can convince them it's a good question.
Yeah.
Let them ask it for you.
Yes, because that's not a good story if you refuse to answer the question.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, good. Good.
Yes.
It's sort of related to the whole idea of states. There's been a lot of rumblings lately on Substack and Blue Sky about non-compliance and pushing back, and states pushing back against the federal government. One of the possibilities is if there are laws on the books that don't allow people to wear masks, or they need to identify themselves, or something to push back against these ICE raids that might happen on a state level. And if there aren't laws on the books, that maybe we should be putting laws on the books. Is it worth us putting pressure on our legislators, our attorney generals, our comptroller to try and?
I think it is. It all depends what the law is, but it seems to me that it is worth it doing that.
Because they could make a law, change a law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and it would pass most likely here.
Mary, I think there is a bill in the works by a legislator to do just that. And Third Act will get behind it
So we can
if
support
it gets
that.
through the process and actually goes to the floor,
Okay.
definitely.
Because people are talking about we're not considered a blue state because we have a Republican governor, but it seems like we can still use a lot of those tactics.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Tom.
So there's Robert Putnam was a social scientist at Harvard who wrote Bowling Alone, and he was the feature of a film called join or die. And Vermont Public, you can watch it on Netflix, and it's been shown at lots of libraries, and there have been discussions that Vermont Public has organized. Okay, that's mostly intended for people like us, saying, you know, not only is your diet important, not only is exercise important, not only is sleep important, but also relationships, social contacts, being, you know, whether it's through faith community, whether it's through bowling, whether it's through going out and having a beer or whatever. And the research that they cited in there was, you know, not having that when you're in the 60s and 70s and 80s is like a death sentence. If you're not a joiner, you're going to die within the next couple of 3 years. Which just sounds pretty brutal. Okay, so now back to young men feeling disaffected, feeling like they've been passed over. Got an 11-year-old grandson, and I just asked him, what are his fellow kids doing? I'm driving around a lot to soccer games, out to the tree farm that you helped get going for, and elsewhere, all over the place. And I asked all these guys, you know, what do you do? And other than sports, they don't join anything. They don't feel like there's anything that interests them in school or out of school other than sports right now. Maybe that's just preteen years. But I talked to other people in the neighborhood and so forth, and it's the same thing. And I've heard people speaking at UVM just talking about men. You know, UVM's now 2/3 women, 1/3 men. UVM Medical School now is 2/3 women, 1/3 men. They can't get good men to apply to UVM Medical School. I mean, I've heard my primary and 2 specialists tell me that. You know, what do we do? How do we get men involved? How do we overcome this feeling that, and not just preteens, but young men? How do we get at them better?
I think first we have to figure out how to circumvent the way people get their information in general, not just young men. But the internet is basically a poisonous well. It's a great tool, it's fun to have, but when you really get into it, you've got, you know, billionaire companies feeding you by algorithms to pull you in, and they don't give a damn what happens to you, as long as you've got money to help them buy their stuff that's in the algorithm. So it's going to be very hard. And I think in some cases, the schools are going to have to make a difference. We're going to have to, I've always thought that for what they did, we undervalue teachers. But of course, taxpayers don't want to pay teachers. But, you know, I think one of the problems is that the school system, where all young men are at one point, is a system that needs to be a lot smarter about how we deal with this. I do think sports is a big deal. I mean, sports was, when I was a parent of young children, sports mattered a lot. But, you know, suppose your kid is not sports inclined. Well, there's music. And there's still, a bunch of very good things going on in Vermont in the arts and music. And so that all matters. I actually think that I don't have a solution, but I think a lot of it is the deterioration of community. And in Vermont, the community is stronger than it is in most other places, and we have to make sure that doesn't go away. That's actually something useful that our age group can do. It's very hard to be a parent now. I think it's harder than it was when we were parents. Because, you know, you're pulled in every different direction by your job. You're probably not paid as well as we were relative to where we are. And that's going to get worse because Trump is an idiot and can't manage the economy. And so I think it's going to take, I think the community has to decide, but I think we've got to include, I mean, I don't think it would be a terrible thing to have meetings and bring all the young people to the town meetings and stuff like that and just say, well, what do you think? And, you know, that's in some ways what I meant by, you know, do you want a 10-year-old telling you what to do? Well, it wouldn't be such a terrible idea to sit down at a table and listen to a 10-year-old to what 10 years old had to say.
Bernie does a lot of activities.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. And I like his essay contest every year and all that kind of stuff. So I think we're gonna have to be conscious about bringing people in. It's a much hard, it's not so hard in Vermont, although there's some very rural areas in Vermont that don't have the ability to do it. But it's really hard in places that have been hollowed out, where all the, the young people have left. And so the children that grow up there, it's hard for them. So I don't know what the answer to this is. I worry about this with I have a 9-year-old who's desperate to get his own phone. Well, my son has held off on that, and his wife have held off on that, but the pressure is enormous. And I think kids looking at those phones is like giving them a ration of arsenic with lunch every day. Because sooner or later, the curiosity, I remember I was down, they were in Philadelphia, we were watching a baseball game, a great baseball game on television. And he was fiddling with his phone. And I happened to hear this very smooth talking, nice guy talking about buying some kind of baseball tokens or something, and the other people won't tell you how to do this, but I'll tell you. And I just looked at him. I said, that guy's lying his face off to you. And he, what? I said, those people lie. Every one of them is a liar. So if you believe what you see on the internet, they're not interested in you, and they're not interested in your baseball tokens. They want your money. And it's a tough, cynical message to give to a 9-year-old, but the billionaires and their companies are doing it. But we're going to have to be doing that kind of stuff. And sometimes I think it's going to have to be grandparents to get in and do some of that. And it's hard to do that because, especially when they get to be 13, because they know everything and you know nothing. But we're going to have to educate our kids about the perils of the internet, because the internet, when the internet first came out, I was going to write a book with a former student of mine about it. This is the greatest thing since sliced bread. It's going to transform everything. Well, it transformed everything, but it's not the greatest thing since sliced bread. It's been basically perverted by people who figured out how to make a lot of money by screwing our kids. And I think we're going to have to we're going to have to educate them so they don't get suckered into all that stuff. And it's going to be a community effort. Yes?
So I say, teachers are raving about the cell phone ban.
Yeah.
It's working.
I think it's a great idea.
Made eye contact for years.
Oh, my granddaughters doesn't complain at all.
No, they needed it. It needed to happen.
It's so funny. I can remember when my child was in school, he'd come home from middle school, and the same people he'd seen all day long, he's on IM with them, IMing back and forth. Now, no, there is no IM anymore, but it was instant messaging was sort of the preview of and I'm just thinking to myself, wait a minute, you spent all day with these guys and now you're doing this? But it is addictive, and I do think that's a good management.
And in sports, you don't have the phone.
Right.
So
right.
you do the same thing.
Yeah, but not all kids like sports, so you've got to figure out how to do that.
Music too.
I have a question about RFK and what he's doing. Do you think there's a role for us? Have you heard about soft secession?
Yeah.
With the West Coast states forming an alternate health union kind of, and now we are as well here to combat the ridiculousness.
It's happening anyway.
Yeah. No, I'm saying it is. Do you see a role, I'm just always looking for roles for old people like me to actually do something. I mean, do we have a role in terms of combating what RFK is doing to dismantle?
Well, I have publicly said I'm never going to Florida or Texas because
that's a great one to
because I think it's dangerous.
Yes.
It would be dangerous for my kids, so I'm not going. Now it's one person. But if
well, boycotts work great, as we know from South Africa.
But I'm not doing it because I hate the government in Florida and Texas, which I do. I'm going because I think it's dangerous for old people to go down where there's a ton of unvaccinated people around. Bad things will happen.
We are running up against a time boundary.
Okay.
And should we take?
Maybe one more question?
Then you have to pick them.
Is there one more question? Or Sean?
Let me just finish Maz's question about soft secession. I've never actually heard of that before, but it's happening.
It's happening.
You know, the mayors that went up, the Vermont mayors that went up to meet with some of the Quebec mayors, that should be happening in every state in the north, on the northern border is getting hammered because of what Trump said about the Canadians, who are deeply, deeply, I know a lot of people in Canada because, you know, for a lot of reasons. And I've talked to some of them, and they're even rude to me, and I've known them for 20 years, and they're just so angry, and I can understand why.
Totally.
So obviously that's terrible for our economy, so there's now going to be, I think, a group of northern states that are going to figure out how to minimize the problem. I think the healthcare thing, I've been agitating for Vermont and the New England states to join with the Washington, Oregon, and California on healthcare policy, so that we have a CDC that essentially are a state version of the CDC. So I don't know. I mean, soft secession is a problem at some point, because then you actually have to figure out why you should pay taxes as the federal government. But for the time being, I do think setting up parallel institutions, I wouldn't believe anything that came out of Washington. I mean, the CDC was a great organization, right?
Yes.
I'm never going to believe a thing that, I don't watch the news because I don't believe anything Trump says, so what's the point? But there are a lot of sensible, thoughtful people, and I actually think sensibility and thoughtfulness eventually wins out, because, you know, people's kids in Florida are going to die from this too. And in Texas, they already have.
Yeah.
We could do all we can to talk to people and have interchange with people about, you know, what their issues are. My biggest problem is the subversion of voting. And it's gonna be a bigger discussion than we have time for, but what can we do as Third Act? Talk to attorney generals? What can we do to support Trump from stealing the election?
That's a very good question. I don't know the answer. I think you have to focus on the states where we can win. There are going to be some states that you know, the crackpots control everything to the degree there's not much you can do about it. So pick your spots. One of the good things about living in this place where there's 50 different states is that you don't have to win this fight in Alabama. You can just ignore Alabama, but you do have to, and you don't have to win it in Florida, but we got to win it someplace. So we're going to have to go into red territory somewhere, and that's why I mentioned Sherrod Brown. He was a Democrat who lost his seat the last time, but now Trump's numbers are going to be underwater. Who knows? Now the right wing controls the election apparatus in Ohio, so that's scary. But you know, a lot of the local candidates will figure out what we should do to help elections be fair in Ohio. So I can't give you the answer right now, but what I would say is focus on small and don't let the big get you down. If you think the whole country's going to hell in a handbasket, then focus on a place that you think you can not let go for hell in a handbasket.
Thank you for that.
I think Prashant has the last question.
Well, it's a statement and a question. For young boys, I don't think that focusing on sports is a good idea at the moment, because our dear president is very much against trans people in sports and very much against the fact that women who are in sports and sports teams that are run by women should not be equal. And so I'm not sure that men are going to get there any sense of, you know.
Well, I don't know. This is interesting. I saw I've forgotten what news program it was on last night or the night before, where the Indianapolis Colts, which was not run by a Democrat, believe me, the owner died, and Irsay, who'd been there forever, he was in infamy forever in Baltimore because he moved the Colts out of Baltimore to Indiana in the middle of the night. His 3 daughters, he left the team to his 3 daughters, and they're running the team. So I wouldn't count the idea that women can run athletic teams, and I think they will.
I hope so,
Yeah.
but it's not that I'm against women doing anything, I'm pro.
No, I know, but I'm saying the fact of achievement is what matters. We can talk till we're blue in the face until about this is the way it should be. Our job is not to talk about the way it should be. Our job is to make what we think should be become. So I like to look at examples where people, yes, I agree with the trans kids not being able to play on sports. It's a horrible thing. But at least in our state, we basically gave that to Trump. And so did California. And so, yes, he's going to come after the states, the places he doesn't like in big ways. I think it's easier if there's 35 people resisting him in different states, 35 states that resist, and maybe we're not going to win on that particular issue right this moment, but we just keep coming at him and coming at him and coming at him until we do. I mean, my view is the degree of hate in the Republican Party can't make them all happy, because haters are not happy people, and eventually they fall apart. But we have to be resolute in our positions and standing up for what we think is right, knowing we're not going to win every battle, but we will win some, and we're going to keep winning them. Because they have no future. Mankind has no future if it's run by people like that. And that's been proven again and again and again. I was asked about, so I gave a talk about a year ago to a group like this, except it was by Zoom, so it was a lot of people. And they asked me, what was going to happen. And I said, great empires fall. And maybe we'll fall. But great empires fall and then they're reconstituted and they come back in another form. So, our species is horribly flawed. And, we can look at even our own behavior. I can examine my behavior sometimes and say, what did you do that for? That wasn't very nice. And couldn't you have done this a little better? So we're all have these sort of complicated ways of dealing with things. But so far, the trajectory's been up. The one thing you mentioned at the beginning, which we didn't talk about, was climate change, which I worry about the most. And I think there's going to be a catastrophe before we really actually figure out how to we already know what we should be doing. But, so Trump takes the money away from this enormous project off Rhode Island. Guess who's really mad at him? All the unions who have those jobs. Now in Rhode Island it doesn't matter, but a lot of those unions come from other places. Guess where Biden put a ton of jobs that had to do with dealing with climate change? In all those red states. And they're starting to lose their jobs. So, look, we're a flawed species and we've done terrible things, but we've also risen to great heights. So I think we have choices that we can make, but I think we have to be resolute. That's the most important thing, is to be resolute. And we're going to take a lot of lumps, and it's going to be discouraging, but what are you going to do? They knock you down, you can either lie down or you can get back up again. I don't think we have a lot of choices. Thank you. Thanks to Maz for making me come to this.
Yeah, thanks, Maz. I've done mine now.
Laura,
Yeah, a couple of announcements.
So while we're all here, I wanted to say that most of you know about what your public media has done with 7 days, but maybe some of you don't. But a week from tomorrow, the issue of 7 days is going to have a message from Third Act. And it's going to be a big blank page. And I can show you what it might look like. We have two versions of it.
Am I this big, double truck, or one page? The message says.
So the message basically is the world without press freedom would look like this, right? And then a very brief call to action. Let's all support our local media. A message from Third Act. And Paula has very kindly supported us on this. But in the interest of kind of mutual support, it generally costs $1,500 if we were to buy an ad, a full page ad. So since Third Act itself doesn't have any budget, I'm looking for any contributions that any of you would like to make to this, which is gonna really have an impact on people, I think, when they open the paper. So I can accept contributions today in cash or a check, and then watch for, in the next day or two, an email from Laura, which will explain other convenient ways of making a contribution that I can then pass along to 7 days.
We should do an email blast.
That's what we're gonna do. Thank you.
I gotta run.
I do have an envelope for money, so.
Well, thank you. This is Ryan.
Thank you for coming, I'm sure.
Thank you.
I was thinking about some of those stories being on CCTV, and I sort of.
Yeah, that's right.